This is Rise, where truth is uncovered and black stories rise from silence to strength. Real voices, bold truth, unshakable legacy. Welcome to Rise. What would you do if you walked into a luxury store with thousands to spend, only to be treated like a criminal? What if every step you took was watched, every move scrutinized, every breath questioned, not because of what you did, but because of who you are? Have you ever felt judged before you even opened your mouth? Has someone ever looked at you and decided you didn't belong? Have you walked into a space where your presence alone seemed to offend the very air around you? If you're nodding your head right now, you're not alone. This happens more than you think, and what I'm about to share with you will validate every uncomfortable moment you've ever experienced. This is exactly what happened to investigative journalist Talia Montgomery, but she had a secret weapon they never saw coming. What she captured on hidden camera will shock you, but what happened next? Pure karma. Before we get into this incredible story, if you're ready to see justice served and karma delivered faster than overnight shipping, smash that like button right now. Trust me, you're going to want to share this one. Talia Montgomery wasn't just any journalist. She was a woman on a mission, fueled by years of witnessing the quiet indignities that black women face every single day. Growing up in a neighborhood where resilience was learned, not taught, she understood the weight of being judged by your appearance before anyone heard your voice or counted your money. You see, Talia had heard the whispers, stories from friends, colleagues, women in her community, all sharing the same painful experience. They called it shopping while black, and it was happening in the most exclusive stores across the country. Women with money, success, and impeccable taste were being treated like suspects in their own success story. But here's where Talia was different. While others accepted this treatment as an unfortunate reality, she refused to let it slide. She had built her career on exposing uncomfortable truths, and this was about to become her most personal investigation yet. The target? Luxe Emporium, an elite fashion store that prided itself on serving the city's most sophisticated clientele. With marble floors that reflected chandeliers worth more than most people's homes, this wasn't just a store. It was a temple of luxury, a place where exclusivity was the religion and your bank account was your prayer. But beneath all that glittering beauty, Talia suspected something ugly was festering. She had received tip after tip about how black women were treated differently at this particular store. The subtle follows by security, the condescending tones from sales associates, the way credit cards were examined just a little too closely. So Talia made a decision that would change everything. She was going undercover. For months, she crafted the perfect persona. Meet Ariana Delacroix, successful entrepreneur, art collector, and someone with the kind of money that should have opened every door at Luxe Emporium. She created a digital footprint that would make any store manager's eyes light up with dollar signs. Social media filled with gallery openings, exclusive events, and the kind of lifestyle that screamed big spender. But here's what made this mission so powerful. Talia wasn't just going in blind. She was going in armed with the one thing that terrifies these establishments the most, the truth. Hidden cameras, recording devices, and the determination to document every single moment of discrimination. What she was about to discover would expose not just one store, but an entire system designed to make certain people feel unwelcome in spaces their money could easily afford. She was about to prove that no amount of marble and crystal could hide the ugly reality of racial bias. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If she was caught, the story would die with her cover. But if she succeeded, she would have the evidence to bring down one of the city's most prestigious stores and shine a light on a problem that had been hidden in plain sight for far too long. On a cool afternoon, Talia stepped into her role as Ariana Delacroix, adjusted her hidden camera, and walked toward the gleaming doors of Luxe Emporium. She had no idea that within the next few hours, she would be thrown out like yesterday's trash. And that the revenge that followed would be so swift and so complete that it would make headlines across the country. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, let's talk about what happened when she walked through those doors, ready to spend thousands of dollars. To understand why Talia Montgomery was willing to risk everything for this story, you need to know her journey. She wasn't born into privilege, and she certainly wasn't handed opportunities on a silver platter. Every achievement in her career came from her relentless pursuit of truth, even when that truth made powerful people uncomfortable. Talia had spent over a decade building her reputation as an investigative journalist who specialized in exposing discrimination in places where it was least expected. She had written exposés on hiring practices at tech companies, revealed bias in lending institutions, and documented how educational systems failed students of color. But this mission was different. This was deeply personal. The whispers had been growing louder for months. It started with her sister calling her after a humiliating experience at a department store. "They followed me around like I was going to steal something," she had said, her voice shaking with anger and hurt. "I had my credit card ready, my money ready, and they still treated me like a criminal." This wasn't an isolated incident. The stories kept coming. Her college friend Maya shared how security guards shadowed her through an upscale boutique while completely ignoring a white woman who was actually concealing items in her purse. Her neighbor told her about a sales associate who loudly announced that certain items were very expensive before she even asked to see them. Her own mother recounted being asked 3 times if she was sure her credit card would work. Each story was a thread in a larger pattern of systematic discrimination that was hiding in plain sight. The phrase "shopping while black" wasn't just a clever social media hashtag. It was a lived reality for millions of women who were being judged by their skin color rather than their spending power. But here's what frustrated Talia the most. These incidents were happening in places that claimed to value diversity and inclusion. Stores that posted pretty statements about equality on their websites while their staff treated black customers like second-class citizens. The hypocrisy was staggering. That's when Luxe Emporium caught her attention. The store had a reputation for being the most exclusive shopping destination in the city. It was the kind of place where celebrities shopped, where politicians' wives spent their afternoons, where being seen was almost as important as what you bought. They prided themselves on their curated experience and their discerning clientele. But Talia had received more complaints about Luxe Emporium than any other store. The stories were remarkably consistent. Black women reported being ignored, followed, questioned about their ability to afford items, and treated with suspicion from the moment they walked through the doors. Meanwhile, the store's marketing featured diverse models and inclusive messaging. The contradiction was glaring. The breaking point came when Talia heard about Dr. Keisha Williams, a successful surgeon who had been asked to leave Luxe Emporium after a sales associate accused her of acting suspiciously while she was shopping for a dress to wear to a medical conference. Dr. Williams had the money, the credentials, and the class, but none of that mattered. She was judged by her appearance and asked to leave. That's when Talia decided to take action. Creating Ariana Delacroix wasn't just about changing her name. It was about constructing an entire identity that would be impossible to dismiss. Talia spent months building this persona, understanding that every detail had to be perfect. She knew that if she was going to expose this discrimination, she needed to document it happening to someone who, on paper, represented everything these stores claimed to value. She started with the digital footprint. Professional photos at art galleries, check-ins at exclusive restaurants, posts about charity galas and cultural events. She created a LinkedIn profile showcasing her fictional art consulting business, complete with testimonials from fictional clients and connections to real art world figures who had agreed to be part of her investigation. The wardrobe was crucial. Talia invested in designer pieces that would immediately signal wealth and taste. She studied how affluent women dressed, moved, and spoke. She practiced the confident stride of someone who had never been told she didn't belong anywhere. But here's what she didn't expect: the psychological toll of creating a version of herself that might be treated with the respect she deserved as herself. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was having to become someone else to prove that she should be treated with dignity as herself. The technical preparation was extensive. Hidden cameras that looked like jewelry, recording devices disguised as everyday accessories, and backup systems in case the primary equipment failed. She even enlisted her tech-savvy friend Darnell to help monitor the feeds remotely and ensure everything was being captured clearly. Drop a comment below if you've ever had to change something about yourself just to be treated with basic respect. This story is about to get intense, and I want to know if you can relate to what Talia was going through. As the day of the operation approached, Talia felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She wasn't just shopping. She was carrying the experiences of every black woman who had been made to feel less than in spaces where their money was welcome, but their presence was not. She reviewed the complaints about Luxe Emporium one more time, noting the specific employees who had been mentioned repeatedly, the particular sections of the store where incidents occurred most frequently, and the times of day when discrimination seemed to be most blatant. The stage was set. The persona was perfected. The equipment was ready. Now all that remained was to see if Luxe Emporium would live up to its reputation for treating certain customers as unwelcome guests in their own shopping experience. The moment Talia stepped through the towering glass doors of Luxe Emporium, she entered a world designed to intimidate. The entrance hall stretched before her like a cathedral of consumption, with soaring ceilings that seemed to whisper, "You better have money." Gleaming marble floors reflected the light from crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's cars. The air itself felt expensive, scented with subtle notes of vanilla and bergamot that seemed to emanate from the very walls. But Talia, now fully embodying Ariana Delacroix, moved with the confidence of someone who belonged. Her heels clicked against the marble with purpose, each step a declaration of her right to be there. She had practiced this entrance dozens of times, knowing that the first 30 seconds would determine how she was perceived and treated. The store was a masterpiece of luxury retail design. Clothing displays were more like art installations, with single garments draped on pedestals and illuminated by spotlights that made every fabric shimmer. The silence was broken only by the soft classical music that seemed to float through the air and the occasional whispered conversation between staff members. That's when she noticed the first red flag. A tall, impeccably dressed concierge near the entrance offered her a polite smile, but his eyes told a different story. There was a wariness there, a subtle tension that hadn't been present when she watched him greet the white woman who had entered just moments before. His smile was professional, but it lacked the warmth and genuine welcome she had observed him extending to others. "Good afternoon, welcome to Luxe Emporium," he said, his voice carrying the trained politeness of someone who had been coached on customer service. But there was something else, a slight hesitation, as if he was trying to determine whether she truly belonged in this space. Talia's hidden camera, disguised as an elegant brooch on her lapel, captured every micro-expression, every subtle shift in body language. She had positioned herself strategically, knowing that the best evidence would come from these seemingly innocent interactions that revealed the true nature of the store's culture. As she moved deeper into the store, she became aware of the attention she was receiving. Not the good kind of attention that comes from being a valued customer, but the hypervigilant watching that makes your skin crawl. She could feel eyes on her, tracking her movement through the store like radar following an aircraft. A sales associate approached her, a woman in her 30s with perfectly styled hair and a smile that seemed painted on. "Can I help you find anything today?" she asked, but her tone carried an undertone that suggested she wasn't sure Talia could afford to find anything. "I'm browsing for now," Talia replied, using the refined accent she had practiced for weeks. "I'm looking for something special for an upcoming gallery opening." The associate's response was telling. Instead of the enthusiastic engagement that luxury salespeople typically show when they smell a potential big sale, she simply nodded and said, "Of course. Let me know if you need anything." Then she walked away, but not far. She positioned herself where she could maintain visual contact, her attention focused on Talia's every move. This was when Talia's training as an investigative journalist became invaluable. She had learned to observe while appearing to be focused on something else entirely. As she examined a stunning evening gown, she was actually listening to the hushed conversations happening around her. That's when she heard it now. The coded language that confirmed her worst suspicions. Two employees were standing near a display of handbags, speaking in voices just loud enough for her sophisticated recording equipment to capture. "She's in Section 3, one whispered to the other. "Keep an eye on her. She looks uncertain." The word choice was deliberate. Uncertain was clearly code for something else. Something that had nothing to do with her shopping confidence and everything to do with their assumptions about whether she belonged there. Another employee, a middle-aged man with the kind of polished appearance that screamed management, was speaking into a small radio device. "We have a situation developing in the evening wear section," he murmured, his eyes fixed on Talia as she continued to browse. A situation? She was literally just looking at dresses. But to them, her presence alone constituted a situation that required monitoring and management. The contrast between the store's beautiful facade and the ugly reality of what was happening became more apparent with each passing moment. Here was a business that had built its reputation on elegance and sophistication, yet its staff was engaging in behavior that was anything but sophisticated. As Talia moved through different sections of the store, she noticed how the staff seemed to communicate about her presence through subtle signals. A nod here, a meaningful look there, a whispered conversation that stopped abruptly when she came within earshot. It was like watching a coordinated surveillance operation being conducted against someone whose only crime was shopping while black. The most chilling moment came when she approached a display of luxury accessories. A security guard, dressed in a suit that was meant to make him blend in with the upscale environment, suddenly appeared nearby. He wasn't being subtle about his presence, he wanted her to know she was being watched. He positioned himself so that she couldn't move without him seeing her, his attention fixed on her hands, her purse, her every gesture. But here's what they didn't know. Every moment of this discrimination was being recorded. Every whispered comment, every suspicious look, every coded message was being captured by equipment they couldn't see. Talia's hidden cameras were documenting a pattern of behavior that the store's management would have sworn didn't exist. The psychological impact was exactly what she had expected, but experiencing it firsthand was still jarring. Despite her preparation, despite knowing what to expect, the constant surveillance and subtle hostility was wearing on her. She could feel her confidence being chipped away, moment by moment, interaction by interaction. Yet she pressed on, knowing that every second of this humiliating experience was building towards something bigger than herself. What started as subtle surveillance was about to transform into something far more aggressive. As Talia moved through her first hour in Luxe Emporium, the mask of politeness was beginning to slip, revealing the true nature of how this establishment treated customers who looked like her. The first major incident occurred at the jewelry counter. Talia had been admiring a collection of statement necklaces when a sales associate approached her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. This woman, whose name tag read Patricia, had the kind of perfectly manicured appearance that screamed luxury retail veteran. "These pieces are quite exclusive," Patricia said, her voice dripping with condescension. "They start at around $8,000. She paused, letting the price hang in the air like a challenge. "Are you familiar with this designer?" The implication was clear. She was testing whether Talia could afford to even dream about these pieces. But here's what made it worse. Talia had watched Patricia interact with other customers, and she had never led with price. She had never questioned anyone else's familiarity with the designers. She had simply presented the pieces and allowed customers to ask questions. "I'm quite familiar with his work," Talia replied smoothly, maintaining her Ariana Delacroix persona. "I actually own several pieces from his earlier collections." Patricia's expression shifted slightly, but not in a good way. Instead of the excitement that should have accompanied the prospect of a knowledgeable customer with money to spend, there was something else, skepticism mixed with irritation. "Really?" Patricia's tone carried a note of challenge. Which pieces? This was unprecedented. Talia had never seen a sales associate interrogate a customer about their previous purchases. It was like being asked to prove your right to shop there. But Talia was prepared. She had done her homework on this designer, studying his collections for weeks in preparation for exactly this kind of questioning. As she detailed specific pieces from the designer's archive, Patricia's discomfort grew. She hadn't expected Talia to know what she was talking about. The sales associate had clearly assumed that Talia was just another person who had wandered in without the means or knowledge to belong there. But here's where it gets really shocking. Patricia's response to being proven wrong wasn't embarrassment or improved service. Instead, she became more hostile. "Well, if you're such an expert," Patricia said, her voice now openly antagonistic, "you probably know that these pieces require a significant deposit before we can even remove them from the display." Another test. Another hoop to jump through. Talia watched Patricia's face as she pulled out her black American Express card. A card that should have immediately signaled her spending power. But instead of the usual excitement luxury retailers show when they see that particular piece of plastic, Patricia's expression remained skeptical. "I'll need to verify this with my manager," Patricia said, taking the card with obvious reluctance. Meanwhile, the security presence was becoming impossible to ignore. What had started as subtle surveillance had evolved into open shadowing. A security guard was now following Talia at a distance of approximately 10 feet, making no effort to hide his presence. When she moved to the dress section, he moved to the dress section. When she walked toward the shoe department, he walked toward the shoe department. The psychological impact was exactly what it was designed to be: intimidating and humiliating. Every other shopper in the store could see that she was being treated as a potential criminal. The message was clear. This woman cannot be trusted. But what made it even more devastating was the reaction of the other customers. Or rather, their lack of reaction. A well-dressed woman in her 50s was browsing nearby when the security guard positioned himself between Talia and the exit. The woman glanced up, saw what was happening, and looked away. Not a word of protest, not even a disapproving look. She simply pretended not to notice that another human being was being treated with obvious disrespect. This happened repeatedly. Customer after customer witnessed the discriminatory treatment and chose to remain silent. Their complicity was deafening. If you've ever experienced discrimination like this, or if you've witnessed it happening to someone else, share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters, and these stories need to be heard. By the second hour, Talia was fighting an internal battle that was threatening to blow her cover. Every instinct she had developed as a journalist was screaming at her to confront this treatment directly. She wanted to demand explanations, to call out the hypocrisy, to force these people to acknowledge what they were doing. But she knew that the moment she broke character, the investigation would be over. The evidence she was gathering would be dismissed as the angry reaction of someone who had been caught in wrongdoing. She had to maintain her composure, no matter how much it cost her personally. The breaking point almost came when she was examining a designer handbag. The price tag read $12,000, well within her means as Ariana Delacroix. But when she asked to examine it more closely, the sales associate hesitated. "Are you sure you want to handle it?" the associate asked. "These bags are quite delicate, and any damage would be expensive." The implication was that Talia couldn't afford to pay for any damage she might cause. But here's what made it particularly insulting. She had watched this same associate hand similar bags to other customers without any warnings or hesitation. Some of those customers had examined the bags roughly, swinging them around, testing the weight. But none of them had been warned about potential damage. The coded language was becoming more frequent and more obvious. Staff members were using their radio devices to communicate about her presence in terms that were clearly meant to suggest she was a security risk. "The subject is now in Section 4, she heard one guard say into his radio. "Maintaining visual contact. Subject, not customer, not shopper. Subject, the kind of language typically reserved for people under criminal investigation. The most shocking moment came when she was browsing in the designer dress section. She had been looking at a stunning evening gown when she overheard two staff members having a conversation that they clearly thought was private. "She's been here for over an hour," one whispered to the other. "Why hasn't she bought anything yet?" "People like her usually don't," the other replied. "They just come in to look and waste our time." People like her. The phrase hit like a physical blow. Not people who were browsing. Not people who were taking their time to make an expensive decision. People like her, black people who, in their minds, had no business being there in the first place. But Talia held her composure. She continued to browse, continued to ask questions, continued to maintain her professional demeanor even as her heart was racing with anger and humiliation. The hidden cameras were capturing everything. Every discriminatory comment, every suspicious look, every moment of disrespect was being recorded for posterity. The evidence was mounting, and it was damning. As the third hour approached, Talia could sense that the situation was escalating toward a confrontation. The staff was becoming more agitated, more obvious in their surveillance, more open in their hostility. She could feel the tension building like pressure in a volcano. Something was about to happen. Something that would cross the line from discrimination into outright expulsion. And when it did, Luxe Emporium would learn a lesson about karma that they would never forget. The moment Talia had been dreading finally arrived in the form of Bernard Whitmore, the store manager whose reputation for maintaining Luxe Emporium's standards was about to be put on full display. He approached her with the kind of measured steps that suggested he had done this before. Many times before. Bernard was everything you would expect from a luxury retail manager. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, with the kind of polished appearance that screamed authority. But there was something cold in his eyes, something that suggested he was about to enjoy what came next. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice carrying the false politeness that barely masked his true intentions. "I'm Bernard Whitmore, the store manager. Could I have a word with you?" Talia's pulse quickened, but she maintained her composure. "Of course," she replied, staying in character as Ariana Delacroix. "Is there something I can help you with?" Bernard's smile was as cold as winter wind. "Actually, I think you can. Would you mind coming with me to my office? There are some questions I'd like to ask you." The way he phrased it as a request was laughable. This wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in false courtesy. The security guard who had been following her for the past hour was now positioned directly behind her, making it clear that refusing wasn't really an option. "Questions about what?" Talia asked, genuinely curious about what excuse he would use. "Your shopping patterns today have been unusual," Bernard replied, his voice carrying a tone that suggested he was being generous by not being more direct. "We'd like to clarify a few things." Shopping patterns. As if there was a correct way to browse in a store, as if taking time to examine expensive items before making a purchase was somehow suspicious. But Talia followed him, her hidden cameras capturing every moment of this surreal encounter. The walk to Bernard's office felt like a perp walk. Other customers stopped their shopping to stare as she was escorted through the store. Staff members whispered to each other as she passed. The message was clear. This woman had done something wrong, and now she was facing consequences. Bernard's office was a shrine to luxury retail excess. Awards from fashion industry organizations lined the walls, photos of him with celebrities and politicians decorated his desk, and everything from his leather chair to his crystal paperweight screamed success. But the beauty of the space couldn't hide the ugliness of what was about to happen. "Please, have a seat," Bernard said, positioning himself behind his desk like a judge about to render verdict. The security guard remained standing by the door, blocking her exit. "Now," Bernard began, opening a folder that appeared to contain notes about her visit. "You've been in our store for approximately 2.5 hours. In that time, you've examined numerous high-value items, but haven't made a single purchase. Can you explain this behavior?" The question was so absurd that Talia almost broke character. "I'm sorry, But since when is browsing before buying considered unusual behavior? Bernard's expression hardened. When someone spends that much time examining our merchandise without any apparent intention to purchase, it raises concerns. Concerns about what, exactly? About your true intentions in our store. There it was, the accusation laid bare. Her true intentions. As if a black woman couldn't possibly have legitimate reasons for being in an upscale store. As if her presence itself was evidence of criminal intent. My intentions are to find something beautiful for an upcoming event, Talia replied, maintaining her dignity despite the insult. I wasn't aware that taking time to make an expensive decision was considered suspicious. Bernard leaned forward, his voice dropping to a more aggressive tone. Ma'am, I've been managing luxury retail for 15 years. I know when someone belongs in a store like this, and I know when they don't. The mask was completely off now. No more pretense of politeness, no more coded language. He was telling her directly that she didn't belong there, that her presence was unwelcome, that her money wasn't good enough. Are you suggesting that I don't belong in your store? Talia asked, giving him a chance to clarify his position. I'm suggesting that your behavior today has been inconsistent with that of our typical clientele. And what exactly is typical behavior for your clientele? Bernard's pause was telling. He realized he was walking into dangerous territory, but his arrogance pushed him forward. Our typical clients know what they want when they come in. They don't spend hours examining merchandise they have no intention of purchasing. How do you know I have no intention of purchasing? Because people like you. He stopped himself, realizing he was about to say something that would expose his true beliefs. People like me what? Talia pressed, knowing that this moment was being recorded. Bernard's recovery was clumsy and obvious. People who engage in the kind of behavior you've exhibited today are typically not serious buyers. The interrogation continued for another 20 minutes, with Bernard asking increasingly invasive questions about her background, her financial situation, and her reasons for being in the store. Each question was designed to make her prove her worthiness, to justify her presence in a space where her money should have been welcome. Finally, Bernard delivered his verdict. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the store. On what grounds? On the grounds that your behavior has made our staff and customers uncomfortable. Her behavior, not the behavior of the staff who had been following her, questioning her, and treating her like a criminal. Her behavior, the behavior of shopping while black. I haven't done anything wrong, Talia stated firmly. Nevertheless, I'm asking you to leave. If you refuse, I'll have to call security to escort you out. The threat was clear, and Talia knew that resisting would only make things worse. She had what she came for, undeniable evidence of discrimination. Now she had to maintain her dignity while being publicly humiliated. Fine, she said, standing up. I'll leave. The walk out of the store was the longest walk of her life. Bernard and the security guard flanked her as she was escorted through the store like a criminal being removed from the scene of a crime. Every customer, every staff member, every person in that store watched as she was thrown out for the crime of shopping while black. But here's what none of them knew. Every moment of this humiliation was being recorded. Every discriminatory word, every unjust action, every moment of disrespect was being captured for the world to see. As Talia stepped outside into the afternoon air, her heart was pounding with a mixture of anger, humiliation, and determination. She had been treated like a criminal for having the audacity to shop in a store that claimed to welcome all customers. But Bernard and his staff had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. They had expelled a woman whose only crime was being black in their precious store. Now it was time for them to face the consequences. The moment Talia stepped outside Luxe Emporium, she knew that Bernard Whitmore and his staff had just signed their own professional death warrant. They had no idea that they had just expelled an award-winning investigative journalist who had documented every single moment of their discrimination. But they were about to find out. Talia didn't waste a second. Sitting in her car just outside the store, she immediately began reviewing the footage from her hidden cameras. What she saw was even more damning than she had expected. The audio was crystal clear, the video was high definition, and every moment of bias, every discriminatory comment, every unjust action was preserved in perfect detail. The conversation with Bernard was particularly devastating. His barely concealed contempt, his obvious racial bias, his admission that he decided who belonged in the store based on his personal prejudices, it was all there, captured in stunning clarity. But Talia knew that having the evidence was only half the battle. The other half was presenting it in a way that would create maximum impact. She had learned from years of investigative journalism that the truth needed to be packaged properly to cut through the noise of social media and capture public attention. She drove straight home and spent the next 12 hours crafting what would become the most important article of her career. She didn't just want to expose Luxe Emporium. She wanted to start a conversation about the systemic racism that Black women faced in retail spaces across the country. The article was titled, "I Went Undercover at an Elite Store. What They Did to Me Will Shock You." She opened with the most powerful footage, Bernard telling her that people like her didn't belong in his store. Then she methodically documented every moment of discrimination, every coded conversation, every suspicious look. But here's what made her expose truly powerful. She didn't just present the evidence. She contextualized it. She explained how this treatment affected the mental health of Black women, how it reinforced harmful stereotypes, and how it represented a broader pattern of discrimination that needed to be addressed. At 6 a.m. the next morning, Talia published her article on her blog and simultaneously shared it across all her social media platforms. She used the hashtag #LuxeLies to tie together all the evidence and make it easy for people to find and share. The response was immediate and explosive. Within the first hour, the article had been shared over 5,000 times. By noon, it had reached 50,000 shares. By evening, it had been viewed over 1 million times. The hashtag #LuxeLies was trending nationally, and the story was spreading like wildfire across every social media platform. But the real power came from the personal stories that began flooding in. Women from across the country started sharing their own experiences of discrimination in luxury retail spaces. They used the hashtag #LuxeLies to tell their stories, and each new account added fuel to the growing fire of public outrage. Dr. Keisha Williams, the surgeon who had been asked to leave Luxe Emporium months earlier, came forward with her own story. "I thought I was alone," she wrote on Twitter. "I thought maybe I had done something wrong. But seeing Talia's video, I realized that what happened to me was part of a pattern." #LuxeLies. The stories kept coming. A successful businesswoman who had been followed by security while shopping for her daughter's wedding dress. A lawyer who had been asked to provide multiple forms of identification before being allowed to try on a coat. A teacher who had been told that certain items were probably out of her price range before she even asked about them. Each story was a testament to the widespread nature of the problem, and each new voice added to the chorus demanding accountability. The mainstream media couldn't ignore the story. By the second day, every major news outlet was covering Talia's expose. CNN ran a segment titled, "Shopping While Black: The Hidden Discrimination in Luxury Retail." The New York Times published an op-ed about racial bias in customer service. The Washington Post interviewed retail experts about the need for better training and oversight. But the most powerful coverage came from local news stations. They sent reporters to Luxe Emporium to ask for comment, and the footage of Bernard Whitmore trying to dodge questions became its own viral moment. He looked uncomfortable, defensive, and completely unprepared for the scrutiny his actions had brought upon him. The community response was swift and organized. Within 48 hours of the article's publication, local activists had organized a peaceful protest outside Luxe Emporium. They called it Dignity Day, and the goal was simple: to demand that all customers be treated with respect regardless of their race. The protest was unlike anything the upscale shopping district had ever seen. Hundreds of people gathered outside the store, many of them carrying signs with messages like, "Our money matters," and "Respect has no color." The crowd was diverse: Black women who had experienced similar discrimination, white allies who were outraged by what they had witnessed, and community leaders who recognized this as a teachable moment. Kareem Lawson, a respected civil rights activist, delivered a speech that was both powerful and moving. "This isn't just about one store," he declared to the crowd. "This is about a system that teaches people that some customers are more valuable than others. This is about a culture that judges people by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character or the money in their bank account." The speech was live-streamed on social media and shared thousands of times. It became a rallying cry for the movement that was growing around Talia's exposé. Inside Luxe Emporium, panic was setting in. The store's corporate headquarters was fielding calls from angry customers, concerned investors, and aggressive reporters. Their carefully cultivated image of exclusivity and sophistication was crumbling in real time. The company's first response was predictably tone-deaf. They issued a statement saying they were looking into the allegations and that they valued all customers. But this corporate speak only made things worse. Social media users immediately called out the weak response, demanding concrete actions rather than empty words. The pressure continued to mount. Major fashion influencers began posting about the story, many of them sharing their own experiences of discrimination in luxury retail. Celebrities started weighing in, with some calling for boycotts of the store and others sharing the article with their millions of followers. But the most impactful response came from the Black women who had been silent for too long. They began sharing their stories not just about Luxe Emporium, but about discrimination they had faced in stores across the country. The hashtag Luxe Lies evolved into something bigger, a movement to expose and address retail discrimination everywhere. Local elected officials couldn't ignore the growing outcry. The city council announced that they would be reviewing anti-discrimination policies for businesses in the city. The state attorney general's office opened an investigation into whether Luxe Emporium had violated civil rights laws. The financial impact was immediate and severe. Luxe Emporium's stock price dropped 15% in the first week after the story broke. Several major brands announced they were reconsidering their partnerships with the store. The company's reputation, built over decades, was being destroyed in a matter of days. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Talia received a call from a reporter who had been investigating the story. "Bernard Whitmore has been placed on administrative leave," the reporter told her. "The company is conducting a full review of their policies and procedures." It was the beginning of the end for Bernard's career, but it was also the beginning of something much bigger. The story had sparked a national conversation about retail discrimination, and companies across the country were scrambling to review their own practices. The power of social media had turned one woman's humiliating experience into a movement for change. The hashtag Luxe Lies had given voice to thousands of women who had been silenced by discrimination. And the community response had shown that when people stand together, they can hold even the most powerful institutions accountable. But this was just the beginning. The real reckoning was still to come, and Luxe Emporium was about to learn that karma doesn't just strike fast, it strikes hard. The stage was set for consequences that would reshape not just one store, but an entire industry's approach to customer service and dignity. The revolution had begun, and it was beautiful to watch. The dominoes began falling faster than anyone could have predicted. Within 1 week of Talia's exposé going viral, Luxe Emporium's corporate headquarters was in full crisis mode. The company that had prided itself on exclusivity and discretion was now the subject of national scrutiny, and the pressure was becoming unbearable. The first major consequence came on a Tuesday morning when Bernard Whitmore arrived at work to find his key card deactivated. A security guard met him at the entrance and informed him that he was being escorted to a meeting with corporate executives who had flown in from New York overnight. The meeting lasted exactly 12 minutes. "Your employment with Luxe Emporium has been terminated, effective immediately," the corporate representative told him. "Your actions have caused irreparable damage to our brand reputation and violated every principle we claim to stand for." Bernard tried to defend himself, claiming he was just following standard security procedures, but the executives had seen the footage. They had heard his own words condemning him. There was no defense for what he had done, and they knew it. By noon that day, Luxe Emporium had issued a new statement. We have terminated the employment of the manager involved in this incident. His actions do not represent our values or the standards we expect from our team members. But firing Bernard was just the beginning. The corporate damage control team was working around the clock, but every move they made seemed to backfire. Their attempts to distance themselves from Bernard's actions only highlighted how widespread the problem was within their organization. The real knockout punch came when Dr. Keisha Williams, the surgeon who had been discriminated against months earlier, announced that she was filing a class action lawsuit against Luxe Emporium. She had found 12 other women who had experienced similar treatment at the store, and together they were seeking damages for civil rights violations. The lawsuit filing was a media sensation. The press conference, held on the steps of the courthouse, was attended by dozens of reporters and covered live on multiple news networks. Dr. Williams spoke with the kind of authority that comes from being both a respected professional and a victim of injustice. This isn't about money, she declared to the assembled media. This is about ensuring that no other woman has to endure what we experienced. This is about holding corporations accountable for the culture they create and the behavior they tolerate. The lawsuit detailed a pattern of discrimination that went far beyond individual incidents. It revealed training materials that included coded language about suspicious behavior, policy documents that gave employees broad discretion to remove customers they deemed problematic, and internal communications that showed management was aware of complaints but had taken no action. The legal filing sent shockwaves through the retail industry. If Luxe Emporium could be held liable for systematic discrimination, what did that mean for other high-end retailers? Companies across the country began conducting urgent reviews of their own policies and procedures. The financial impact on Luxe Emporium was devastating. The stock price continued to plummet, dropping 35% in the 2 weeks following the lawsuit announcement. Several major fashion brands announced they were ending their partnerships with the store. The company's insurance provider began investigating whether they would be liable for damages from the lawsuit. But the consequences extended far beyond one company. The story had sparked industry-wide reckoning that was forcing retailers to confront uncomfortable truths about their customer service practices. Nordstrom announced a comprehensive review of their customer service protocols and promised to implement new training programs focused on unconscious bias. Saks Fifth Avenue issued a statement committing to regular audits of their stores to ensure all customers were treated with equal respect. Even smaller boutiques began examining their own practices, terrified of becoming the next viral story. The National Retail Federation, the industry's largest trade group, held an emergency meeting to address the crisis. They announced new guidelines for member stores, including mandatory diversity training for all customer-facing employees and clear policies prohibiting discriminatory behavior. But perhaps the most significant change came from an unexpected source. The State Attorney General's office, which had been investigating Luxe Emporium, announced they were launching a broader investigation into retail discrimination practices across the state. They had received over 200 complaints in the weeks following Talia's story, and they were taking action. No one should face discrimination when they're trying to spend their money, the Attorney General declared at a press conference. We will hold these companies accountable, and we will ensure that all customers are treated with dignity and respect. The investigation led to new state legislation requiring retail businesses to implement anti-discrimination policies and providing legal recourse for customers who experienced bias. Other states began considering similar legislation, and the federal government announced they were reviewing whether additional protections were needed. The ripple effects were being felt in corporate boardrooms across the country. CEOs who had never thought about retail discrimination were suddenly being asked by their boards to explain their company's policies. Human resources departments were scrambling to develop training programs. Legal departments were reviewing customer service protocols to identify potential liability. The transformation wasn't limited to policy changes. The story had sparked a cultural shift in how discrimination was discussed and addressed. Social media had given victims a platform to share their experiences, and the collective power of those voices was forcing change at every level. Talia found herself at the center of this transformation. She was invited to speak at conferences, interview on news programs, and consult with companies that wanted to improve their practices. But she never forgot that her success came from the painful experiences of women who had been silenced for too long. This was never about one store or one manager, she said during a television interview. This was about exposing a system that allowed discrimination to flourish. The real victory isn't that Bernard got fired. It's that we've started a conversation that will protect future customers. The conversation was indeed changing everything. Business schools began teaching case studies about the Luxe Emporium incident. Customer service training programs were rewritten to address unconscious bias. Industry conferences featured panels on inclusive retail practices. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months after the initial story broke. Talia was walking through the same upscale shopping district where Luxe Emporium was located when she noticed something different. The stores were busier, more diverse, and the atmosphere felt more welcoming. She decided to test the changes by visiting several high-end boutiques. The difference was remarkable. Sales associates were professional and respectful. Security guards were discreet and non-threatening. The coded language and suspicious behavior she had documented were nowhere to be found. The industry had learned its lesson, and customers were the beneficiaries. The fear of becoming the next viral story had motivated genuine change, and the results were visible in every interaction. As for Luxe Emporium, they eventually settled the class action lawsuit for an undisclosed amount. The company implemented comprehensive reforms, including new leadership, mandatory bias training, and regular audits of their customer service practices. They survived, but they were forever changed. Bernard Whitmore, meanwhile, found himself unemployable in luxury retail. His name had become synonymous with discrimination, and no reputable company would hire him. He had learned the hard way that karma doesn't just strike fast, it strikes permanently. The story of Luxe Emporium had become a cautionary tale, a reminder that in the age of social media and viral accountability, discrimination would not be tolerated. The message was clear: treat all customers with respect or face the consequences. Justice had been served, and an entire industry had been transformed. One woman's courage had created change that would protect countless others. 2 years after that humiliating day at Luxe Emporium, Talia Montgomery sat in her office reflecting on how one undercover mission had changed not just her life, but the entire retail industry. The awards on her wall told part of the story: journalism honors, civil rights recognition, and letters of gratitude from women across the country who had found their voices through her courage. But the real measure of her success wasn't in the accolades. It was in the emails she received every week from women who walked into stores with confidence, knowing that the fear of viral accountability had made discrimination too risky for most businesses to tolerate. "I used to dread shopping in high-end stores," wrote one woman from Chicago. "But after your story, I noticed everything changed. Sales associates actually smile now. Security guards are respectful. You gave us back our dignity." That was the legacy Talia was most proud of. Not just exposing one store's discrimination, but creating a cultural shift that protected countless others. The ripple effects were still spreading, with new legislation being passed, training programs being implemented, and companies voluntarily auditing their practices to avoid becoming the next cautionary tale. The fight against discrimination was far from over, but the battlefield had fundamentally changed. Social media had given victims a platform, viral accountability had given them power, and collective action had given them results. The days of suffering in silence were ending. Talia's experience had proved that individual courage, when amplified by truth and technology, could topple institutional bias. Her hidden cameras had captured more than just discriminatory behavior. They had documented a system that needed to change, and that documentation had become the catalyst for transformation. The story of Luxe Emporium had become required reading in business schools, a case study in how quickly reputation could be destroyed when companies failed to live up to their values. It had shown that in an interconnected world, accountability was no longer optional, it was inevitable. But perhaps the most important lesson was about the power of refusing to accept the unacceptable. Talia could have walked away from that store, accepted the discrimination as just another part of being a black woman in America, and moved on with her life. Instead, she chose to fight back, and that choice had created waves of change that were still spreading. If this story inspired you, if it made you think about the power of standing up for what's right, then smash that like button and subscribe for more stories of courage and justice. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Drop a comment telling us about a time you witnessed discrimination or stood up for someone who was being treated unfairly. Remember, change doesn't happen when we stay silent. It happens when we find the courage to speak up, to document injustice, and to demand better. Every one of us has the power to be the person who says, "This is not acceptable," and does something about it. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And sometimes, one person's courage is all it takes to change the world. Be that person. The world is waiting for your story.